Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation today. And I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about our technology. Videregen is a company based in the UK, in Liverpool in the UK, and we're supported very heavily by the Cell Therapy Catapult and a number of other organisations and grant funding bodies there, as well as institutional investors. Now, I'll tell you about our technology, which is to create personalised, non-immunogenic organ replacement technologies. So as a brief overview for the company, we are a clinical stage company. Some of our technologies are about to enter the clinic or already enrolling in the clinical trials. We have a strong management team and a very supportive investor base that's helped support us over the last 2 to 3 years of our development. And we're focused on the development of personalised, which is autologous and non-immunogenic organ replacement technologies, but specifically for orphan indications and chronic diseases where there is no unmet need or there's a critical medical need that needs addressing. And most of these typically are chronic conditions that have a very high on cost for patients and well, not for patients, clearly they're very sick, but for the healthcare organisations that have to treat those patients. And this is using a proprietary stem cell technology, which is a decellularisation and recellularisation technology for which we have proprietary claims. And so the company is well funded through our next clinical phase, through a combination of supportive institutional investors, private investment, and also some grant funding from UK institutions, which have been very helpful. Now, leading programs are an airways portfolio led by a trachea program, trachea replacement, and also an epithelial mucosal cell lining, and a larynx replacement as well, which forms an airways portfolio. We also have other organ replacement technologies further back in preclinical development, which forms a wider leverage of the technology and the platform. Importantly, for these types of technologies, we have, or at least there's background for this, for clinical proof of concept for man of trachea replacement, which I'll talk about in a few moments, in compassionate cases, which is an important point for our type of technology, which demonstrates, it doesn't show safety and efficacy, but it gives you an indication that the technology has the potential to be both safe and have performance for the patients. So organ replacement, so our technology is based on a decellularised organ scaffold. So in the case of trachea and larynx, it's a decellularised cadaveric donated organ, which we take away all the cells, which leaves a scaffold which still looks like the original organ, but it has no cells anymore. So clearly that won't work. It's just a scaffold which can be implanted into anybody. It's non-immunogenic, but you need to add the cells back to give it life, to give it function. So we then take the patient's own, in this case, it's autologous stem cells. So these are mesenchymal stromal cells for the trachea, to create a personalised organ replacement where there's no immunosuppression is required, which is important because clearly in other organ transplantation technologies, immunosuppression is critical to make sure that the transplant lasts. That has its own comorbidities and it leads to a shortage of life, a shortage in the lifespan as well. So to describe this for the trachea, so the trachea is donated, then we take that, we decellularise it, take all the host cells away from it, leaves an acellular scaffold which has all the structural and extracellular matrix integrity that it had when it was part of the original person. And that's important because maintenance of that extracellular matrix structure and all the cues and signals that are contained in that niche matrix are important for cues for the cells then to differentiate when they're implanted. We then reseed that back with the patient's own stem cells, and then it becomes implanted back into a patient. So it's personalised to that patient. So we've taken the technology, we've now wrapped that into a GMP manufacturing process for both trachea and larynx, and that then gives us our 3 core airways portfolios. So our Inspire project, which is our phase 1 trachea replacement project, larynx replacement and airway mucosal replacement as well. Behind that we have a small bowel replacement, so this is again a decellularised bowel. In this case it's not a human bowel because human bowel transplantations aren't performed very frequently, they're generally not very effective. There's only been a handful of those types of transplants in the UK and maybe 100 or so in the US over history. So in this case we would take a porcine small bowel, so a pig small bowel, because of the homology with human tissue, decellularise that, including the vasculature, and then add back bowel organoids to create a bowel replacement. And then further back and more ambitious in our technology pipeline is a liver replacement. So we can decellularise a complete porcine liver and retain all the structure and demonstrate that the native vascular system is still perfused and active and patent. What we haven't worked through yet is how we recellularise that properly to create mature hepatocytes that have function So that's a bit further back in our development profile. So the opportunity that we have with this is potentially very big. Clearly, we're focusing on improving the lives of patients. That's our number one goal. If we make that right, then everything else will be successful. And these are debilitating orphan conditions where there's a shortage of treatment options, and hopefully a personalised replacement therapy like we're providing will need no immunosuppression. It will need reduced comorbidities, improve patient survival, and clinically and cost-effective. And on the cost-effective side of things, we are working as well to generate, even though we're still at phase 1, to generate our plan for health economics and cost-effectiveness. And as we heard yesterday in some of the sessions about from the payers' perspective, we're beginning to engage with some of the payers in the UK to understand how they perceive these types of new therapies, because clearly the current reimbursement model doesn't work for this type of technology. So trachea replacement is due to go to clinical trial in phase 1 in the new year, so quarter 1 2016. The larynx replacement is already enrolling patients, and the mucosa replacement is in GMP validation at the moment, and then the other two technologies are further back in preclinical and development. So just to demonstrate that the technology can work and has the potential to do good for people, this is published in the Lancet in 2012. So Kieran was a young boy who was born with congenital deformity of his trachea, had stenosis, and went through life until 10 years old having multiple procedures and stenting to keep his airway open, just so he could breathe. And often patients like Kieran would describe the way they breathe as like breathing through a straw, because their trachea is so narrow, it's very difficult to breathe. And patients like this may not necessarily die directly of the trachea issues, but they have knock-on effect on the cardiovascular and respiratory system, because that struggles so much to provide the oxygen that the patient needs. So anyway, when Kieran was 10, he presented with a metal stent which we eroded through his trachea into his aorta, so it was an emergency procedure. He had no other options available to him, the surgeons didn't, and so surgeons in London, led by Professor Martin Birchall and Professor Martin Elliott, who we're now working with to develop the technology further, decellularized a cadaveric trachea, added Kieran's own cells back to that trachea scaffold, and implanted it back into Kieran. Now, 5 years later, Kieran's still alive and well. He's at school, he's growing, he's very happy. He's played drums on Irish TV, where he lives. He's met the Pope, and clearly that's not what every patient will do, but he's a demonstrator really that the technology has potential. So our GMP manufacturing process relies on the cadaveric donation of tissues, in this case trachea or larynx. And we partner with state-of-the-art facilities for tissue collection and for recellularization. And then these produce our organ scaffolds, which are then ready for implantation. So this is ready for both commercial, and it's also adaptable, and we've scaled it in a way that we can scale it out, not up, but out for future commercial supply and autologous supply. So we take the organ, we decellularize it, and then we harvest the autologous cells, in this case MSCs from the iliac crest, and then reseed the tracheal scaffold. It goes through the various QC and manufacturing procedures before it's released in a closed system for transportation to the clinic and then implantation. So in terms of our clinical regulatory status for the trachea replacement, we have successful proof of concept demonstrated in compassionate cases with the background technology. We have an established GMP manufacturing process in place. We've submitted for our CTA approval, so clinical trial approval in the UK for our phase 1 to MHRA. And at the time of writing this presentation last week, we were awaiting approval. Actually, we received that yesterday. So we're now approved, at least from a regulatory perspective. Now need to go through ethics and local R&D procedures at the hospitals to go through. But that's a big milestone, a big tick for the technology to get through the regulators with both the manufacturing, the GMP, the investigational medicinal product dossier, and all the clinical trial protocols. So that's a great thing for us at the moment. So our phase 1 clinical trial will start in Q1 2016. And I have to, again, offer some significant acknowledgement here to the Cell Therapy Catapult, who've helped us significantly with both the regulatory and the clinical aspects of our technology, and they've helped us get to where we are from a startup company to someone who's now entering clinical trials. Our phase 2 pivotal study is in the design at the moment, and we'll have some announcements probably in October time around the funding for that, and that will begin, depending on the performance of the phase 1 study, in 2017. Larynx replacement technology, that's also has GMP manufacturing in place. In fact, that's now enrolling patients for a phase 1/2 clinical trial, and that's led by the University College London, who are progressing that technology. And the regulatory framework, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I'll say it anyway. It's an ATMP, Advanced Therapy Medicinal Product in Europe, and it's classified, it will be ultimately classified and controlled by CBER in the US. Now, our IP and commercial strategy, well, we have significant know-how, and again, as I touched on yesterday in one of the plenary sessions, I think that clearly we have some patents. We've applied for patents in around the trachea, the bowel, the larynx, decellularization, recellularization technologies. We've also built up over the years, and it's taken 10 to 15 years to get this technology where it is significant know-how and state-of-the-art methodology, which we kind of keep as trade secrets. And that's kind of an ongoing thing that we're trying to build in the company, to kind of keep that as a critical mass within the company so we can leverage that in the future for future technologies. So ongoing know-how and IP development through the various aspects we're doing, and this is important to gather for us as we move through our process of taking the technology from the lab to the clinic and through the GMP manufacturing, and the industrialization process that we need to go through creates a lot of know-how. And sometimes that's IP-able, sometimes we decide not to file patents because it's easier and maybe more protectable to keep those kind of technologies in-house. We have a long-term collaboration and pipeline agreement with a leading research institute in London, which is the Northwick Park Institute of Medical Research, and they provide a pipeline of regenerative medicine technologies for us to evaluate, and then, if we choose, to take them through to commercialization. And our clinical development strategy, or our strategy of our company, at least over the next period, is to focus on our orphan indications and leverage the same core platform like we can, which is why we're focused on an airways portfolio, because we can use the same core manufacturing, GMP manufacturing technologies, the same facilities, the same people, the same know-how and procedures, so we can leverage that over multiple indications. And while we're funded through our clinical program over the next period, we are starting to look at what does that future hold beyond the next 2-3 years, and looking at partnership outreach programs and how we take this technology to a wider audience and fund this in a more grander scale to the future. So to summarise where we are, we're a clinical stage regenerative medicine company with a portfolio of autologous cell-based tissue engineered organ replacement products, which are personalised for the patient, clearly. We assume these will be cost effective. Certainly the analysis we've done so far suggests that they will be, and that's the reason why we targeted not just orphan indications, but indications where there is no current therapy, and where the current therapy that exists is a maintenance therapy, which has a high on-cost. And typically for trachea, it might cost up to $1 million for over a lifetime of a patient to keep the patient just alive, not well, just alive, with a poor quality of life. We have regulatory approvals in place now for 2 of our products, so larynx and the trachea replacement both have approvals to move forward the clinical trial. And our airways focus is our clear focus for the next 2 to 3 years. And if the clinical trials go to plan, we'll have our first product hopefully ready for market authorization in Europe in 2019. One important factor to kind of bring forward, and this was talked about yesterday in some of the technology discussions, was when we started developing these technologies and this way forward, the science and the regulatory pathways didn't really exist for this, but now they do, and that made it difficult for a while ago for us to raise investment. So the science and regulatory pathways exist, which now means that we can access finance much more easily, which we managed to do in the UK. And that means that we can support the growth and the generation of the commercial development of these technologies, and has put us in a very strong position to move forward in this space. Thank you.